Hey, what's going on guys? Welcome back to another video. So this is a 90 minutes long crash course on React hooks for beginners. React hooks are the backbone of using functional components. We will cover each React hook with some practical examples in this video. You can also use the timeline in the description to jump to any React hook directly. So if this sounds interesting, then stick around. Also don't forget to subscribe the channel and press the bell icon so that you don't miss the videos like this one. So let's get started. Alright guys, I have an exciting news for all those who want to become a software developer or have just become a software developer. Unacademy brings you a platform where you can get access to weekly shows which you can watch live. Some of the shows that are going live soon on Unacademy are hiring updates in startups and major tech companies. You will see the eligibility criteria and how you can apply to these jobs. How to approach a code chef problem, pre-placement talks where HR from the top companies come and talk about their hiring process, top 20 questions which are asked in the interviews and how to solve them, accelerating development by using real life projects, and life journey of fellow coders working in FANG companies, and many more shows like that. You will also have an option to interact with industry leaders on the platform and get a chance to take part in an online mock interview to sharpen your skills and get real-time feedbacks. You get all this and much more for a nominal fee of rupees 999 for the entire year. And with my code UNACADEMY, you get a 10% instant discount and you just pay rupees 8999. Want to make sure your college project ticks all the boxes? Want to make a project that helps you to get top internship? Get a chance to get your college projects reviewed by one of the India's top YouTuber, Striver. He will help you in understanding what things went right, what mistakes were made, and how to correct them. Don't miss this golden opportunity. You will find all the links related to an Academy platform in the description below, along with the discount code that you can use for the subscription. Alright guys, so I have already created the React application. So if you want to bootstrap the React app, you can actually use the npx create React app. And I'm running the application on the local environment, so you can use npm start to run the application on the development environment. So I have removed all the unwanted files which I don't want for this video, and I have kept it very simple. So this is our app component, and inside the app component I'm just printing the hello, so we can see the hello here. So the React hooks are the special functions which you can hook in the React features. So previously we used to create the class component in order to use the states, but with the help of the useState React hook, we can actually use the state in our function component without converting the function component into the class component. And that's the beauty, the power of the React hooks are. So let's start with the very basic. So I'm going to create a variable let a, and I'm going to give a value as the page, and I will create a button here. So on click of this button, I'm going to name a function. So this will be the change name, and I will reference the variable here a. All right, and we need to define the function. So I'm going to do the function change name, and this will actually change the value of a. So I'm going to change the value of the page to Nikesh, and I'm going to return the a. All right, and let's also do a console log. So I'm going to do a console log of clicked. So this will become clicked, and I made a little mistake here. So I'm going to do this. All right, and now if I let me add the content in the click button. So this will become click me. All right, and now if I click on it, you will see that the value of the page doesn't changes to the Nikesh. And if we go to the inspect element and in the console, you can actually see the button is clicked, but the value is not changing. And that is because the component is not getting re-rendered when the value of A is getting changed. So we will use the use state. So whenever in the use state, the value of the state changes, the components get re-rendered automatically. And to use the use state, we just need to add the use state, And this is going to give us the useState React hook to be used in our app component. So I will just comment this out for now. And in order to create the state, you will use simply the useState function. But to make the use of the useState function, there are certain rules and you need to follow those rules while using the useState. You cannot use a useState in a conditional basis. So if I make a condition of if true, then I need to make use of useState. And if I save it, then you will see that React gives us an error that you cannot use the use state conditionally. Also, you cannot use the use state inside the functions or inside the conditional rendering. So the use state always should be called in the exact order it is defined. And it's a good practice to keep the use states always on the top. So whenever we define the use state, it actually returns two things. So if I do a console.log of this use state, then we will see that it returns two things. The first one is, okay, so let me uncomment this again. All right. So now we can see that in the console log, it always returns two things. The first one is the current state, and the second one is the function where you can actually update the state. So let me define this a in the form of a use state. So I'm going to write a constant and we are going to do a destructuring of array and we can define any names. We can give the any name. So first I will give the name and the second value will be the function name. So I'm going to give the set name and this will be equals to the use state. And inside this, you can actually give the initial value which you want. So I want the initial value to be the page. All right. And now we can actually reference this name. So I'm going to change this to name here. And I'm going to remove this. And instead of this, I'm going to return. So now I want to update the state whenever I click on the button. So to update the state, you can actually use the set state. And inside this, you can actually give your new state. So my new value will be Nikesh. And I'm going to remove this. All right, now if I save it, let me remove this also, we don't want. And now if I save it, then you will see that if I click me, then the value gets changes because whenever the value of the state changes, the components gets re-render, and that is what the React is. You need to re-render the component whenever the value changes. So for that, we use the use state. Let's take another example for the use state. So I'm going to this time take a boolean. So I'm going to add a flag and I'm going to change this as set flag and I want the initial value to be the false. So you can use the values in the use state. Usually you will use four values. Either you will use a string directly or you are going to use a boolean or you will use an array or an object. So we are going to see all the four examples. And what we will do is I am going to change the set state here. So this state will become flag and I will make whatever the state is. I am just going to alter the state. All right. So we are going to do a conditional rendering. So if we have a flag value as true, then it will print the name. And if it's false, then it's going to print the empty. So now initially the value is false. So when this flag is false, it doesn't going to print the name. But when this flag becomes true, it's going to print the name. So if I click on it, it will changes to the page. If I again click on it, it will get hide. So this is how you can actually use the Boolean in the use state. The next example we are going to see is how we can actually use the use state in numbers. So if we want to use it in the numbers, I will do it as steps here. And this will become set steps. And I will add the initial value as, let's add at 0. All right. And we will add something to display here. So I'm going to add an horizontal. All right. And let's copy this and add it here. So I'm going to add this becomes the increment. I'm going to change this to plus. Let's copy this again and I'm going to change this to decrement. So this will become decrement and here I'm just going to print the state. So our state is steps. All right, and I'm going to copy this and I'm going to cut it and I'm going to add it here. All right, so we have added and now we need to define the two functions, the increment and the decrement. So I'm going to add two functions and this will become increment and let's change this to decrement And when we actually click on it, we need to change the state. So the state will be, we can change it via set steps, and inside the set steps, whatever the steps value is, I just need to add one here there, and here whatever the steps value is, I just need to decrement by one. All right, and now if I save it, we made some typo, so this will become decrement. All right, and now we can see that we have the increment and the decrement. If I click on the plus, it will change the value to 1. If I click on it, it will change the value 2. So when I click on the minus, it's not changing because I made a typo here, so it will become steps. All right, and if I click on it, then it will decrement. But we can do one more thing here, and that is called the prev state, which is the previous state. So what actually is happening here, that it's taking the state which is the 0 and it's going to increment it 1, and it will update the new state. But if we want to run this set step twice, so I want to copy this and I want to run this twice. So that means if I click on the increment, it should be incremented by 2. But if I click on it, it's still going to increment by 1, and that is because it's always going to take the value of the steps and it's going to increment by 1. And here also it's going to take the value of step and increment by 1, but in both the cases the value of the step will be the same. So what we can do here is we can actually use the previous state, and to use the previous state, I'm going to change this to a arrow function, and I will add this previous state. So it's going to give me whatever the value of the previous state is. All right, and let me change this as well for the previous state. So I'm just going to copy this and I'm going to add it. All right, and now if we see that if I click on the plus icon, it's actually going to increment by two numbers. So if it's 5, then it goes to 7. If it's 7, it goes to 9. So that is where when you actually deal with the numbers in the state, you can actually use the prev state in order to make use of the previous state. All right, so the next example I want to show you is the how you can use the use state for the array and objects. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to copy this and I'm going to add it here, and I'm going to make a list of names, and this can be changed to set names. So it's not mandatory that if I'm using names here, that's why I'm using a set names here. I can actually use directly the set state as well. So you can give any name, but it's always a good convention that you understand that whatever the value here is, name of the state, you actually going to update the same name of the state. All right, and this will become an empty array. Okay, and we need to add some JSX. So I'm going to copy this and I'm going to add this here. All right, and below I'm going to create a simple form, and inside the form I'm going to add an input with a type of text, and I'm going to add the value, and the value will be the name. So we have already have the state of name, so we are going to use the same name. And then I'm going to add a placeholder. This will give me add names. And then on change, we can add a function, and I'm going to add an arrow function, which is going to give me an event. And inside the event, I'm going to use the set state, and the value will be event dot target dot value. Whatever the new value is, I want to update it with the new value. Okay, so now on form submit, we will actually write a submit event, and on submit, we need to have simple add names. Okay, and we are going to create a button which will actually be adding the names. So I'm going to add the button here, and I will remove this. So we have already returned the on submit. So I'm going to just write a submit here. All right, and now let's go and write the name function. So add name function. So I'm going to write a function with add names, and this function is going to have an event. And inside the event, what we need to do, we actually need to add the name to the state, which is the set names. So whenever you deal with the arrays or the objects, you always need to be careful because you cannot update directly. So let me show you. If we write the event.prevent default so that the page doesn't get refreshed. So now you cannot add directly the set names. So you want to update the state, and this is actually an array. So you should not directly use names dot push and then you push the new value. Suppose the new value is, let's give the ID as names dot length, and we will give the name as name. All right, and so the name and the ID is same, so we will can remove this and the ES6. All right, so this is a bad practice. You should not update your states directly with the push, or if it's an object, then you should not directly do the, I will just copy this and I'm going to remove this. And in the object, you just need to update the name and not the ID. So you should never do like you just adding the name here and you will add the name. So this is a bad practice. So how you can actually update the states in case of the array or the objects. So let me show you. You will remove this. So first we need to take all the values which are already in the state. So I'm going to write names, and after that I can actually add the ID. So I'm going to add the ID as names dot length, and I'm going to add the name as name. And since we are using the ES6, so I'm going to remove this. All right, so now we have set the name, and then I need to make this input box empty. So for that, let's make the set name as empty. So I'm going to add as here as empty. All right, so now we have added it, and if I click on the submit, then it's get added. So if we want to see the list of the names, then I can simply just do a simple copy paste of my code. Now if I save it, then we will be able to see the name. If I want to add a new name, I can add Nikesh, and it will get, if I want to add Amit, and it will get be added. So this is how you can actually make use of the use state with the array. And the last thing I want to show you, that whenever your components get re-rendered, your use state function is called, but there is a case that you need to set an initial value which will be set after doing a heavy operations. So you're going to make some heavy operations, like you're going to make some API calls and you will get the data, and after receiving the data you are going to set the state. Then in that case, whenever the component re-renders, it will every time it will going to call or do all the heavy operation, and then it's going to set the state. So in such cases your application will slow down. So you can do one more thing. Actually, you can use here a function, and inside this function you can do a console.log, and I'm going to add a clicked here, and then you can actually return the value as 0. All right, and now in this case you will see that the use state function will be called only once. So if I go and inspect it, and if I go to the console, then you will see that if I refresh it, then the click is only clicked once, and if I click on it, it's not getting called again. So this function will be called only once. So you can use this in a cases where you need to have a heavy operation and then you set the initial value. And I can demonstrate this. So let me create one more function. So I'm going to create a function, and I'm going to set the initial value, and this initial value will be, I'm going to write a console.log, and inside this I'm going to write as function called, and this will going to return the value as 0. All right, and now let's use this initial function to this function. So I'm going to remove this, and I'm going to add the initial value here as. All right, and now you see that if I click, then every time the function gets called. So that's why if your initial value is coming from a heavy operation, then you should always use a function here, and then you set the initial value. So that's all you need to know about the use state. All right, guys, so I have a very basic setup of my React application with 3 components. So I have an app component, which imports 2 other components, the C component, which is a class component, and the F component, which is a function component. And inside the class component, I have make use of the use state for my Boolean variable flag, and the initial value of the flag is true. So if you don't know about the use state, check out my previous video on the use state. You can click on the card above, or I will add the link in the description. And this app component has just a single button which actually changes on click of that button. We actually change the state of the flag. If it's a true, it gets changed to false. If it's false, it gets changed to true. So it's a toggle. And based on this flag, we actually do the show and hide of our class component. So if I click on this toggle button, the class component will get hidden. If I click on it back, we can see the class component. And inside the class component, we actually make use of the lifecycle methods. So we have a component did mount. Whenever the component is mount, we actually log this component did mount. whenever the state of the component gets changed or updated, we actually call the component did update. And when we actually destroy our component, we call the component will unmount. So if I do an inspect element and if we go to the console log, then let me refresh the page and you will see that initially the component is mounted. So that's why we get printed the component did mount. And then we have made use of a set interval, which actually for every second it calls the show date function. And inside the show date function, we actually set the state of the time with the new time. And that's why whenever we set the new state of the time, the component gets updated and we get printed that I am from updated. So for every second, the component is getting updated. So we can see that I am updated. And the last thing is when we actually want to destroy this component, we don't want to still listen to this event, the set interval. So we need to destroy this. And for that, what we will do, we are doing the component will unmount, and when the component gets unmounted, we actually clear the interval. So that's why when I click on my toggle class, the component is actually get unmounted and we no longer execute this set interval function. So this is how the lifecycle method works in a class component. But when we work in the functional component, and if we want to use all these lifecycle method effects, then we need to make use of a React hook, which is the useEffect hook. And using the useEffect hook, we can actually achieve all these lifecycle side effects. So let's go to our function component. And inside this function component, we are going to do the same thing. We are going to see how we can do the component mount, how we can do the component will update and the unmount using the use effect. So what I have done, you can actually import the use effect from the React using this use effect. We actually have the two state variables. One is the time, the other one is the message. And we have created a function show date, which actually updates the time. So that is the set time and we update the time with the new time. So now let's go in the app component and instead of the class component, we will be make use of the function component. All right. So now if and let's change this to function component. So I'm going to change this to a function component. All right. And now if I click on it, then we can see that this part is now coming from the function component. And let's go to a function component. And now what we are going to do, we are going to make use of the use effect. And we want to do it first for the component did mount and for the state update. So what we can do, we can simply write here use effect. And this use effect function takes the first argument as a side effect function. So I'm going to make an arrow function here. All right. And inside this arrow function, we will write whatever side effect we want to run. So here I'm going to do a simple console dot log, and this will be used whenever a component mounted or a component is updated. All right. And now if I save it, then you will see that this is getting called whenever a component is mounted or updated. Now we know that the first time the components gets loaded, we see that the component is mounted, but we also want to see that when a state is updated, this use effect function should be called. So now if I click on this change message, it's going to change the message, and along with that, it's also going to run the use effect. So if I click on it, then you will see that the component is mounted or updated. If I click on the show date, then you will see that it is again getting clicked. So whenever I click on the show date, it is actually going to call the use effect function. So this use effect function will be called whenever any of the state of your component gets changed. So if it's changed, if time is changed, it will get called. If message is changed, it will get called. Or if we want to call this function only the first time when the component is mounted and not the state is updated, then we can actually pass a second argument and that will be an empty array. And now if I save it and if I refresh my page, then you will see that a component mounted or updated. And now if I change my state, it is not going to call the use effect function. If I change the show date, it is not actually going to call this function. So if you want to call your use effect function only once when the component is mounted, you can actually pass a empty array here. And now instead of calling this useEffect function on any of the state variable gets changed, we can actually make it as that if I want to call the useEffect only when my time gets changed and not the message, then I can actually pass a dependency of my state variable, which is the time. All right. And if I save it, if I refresh my page, and now if I click on my change message, the useEffect function will not be called because the only dependency for the state we have added is the time. So if I click on the show date, it is actually going to call. If I click it again, it will call again. If I click it again, it will call again. So this is how you can make use of different lifecycle methods of your class component, and you can achieve the same effect with the help of the use effect. And now we have seen that we can actually make use of use effect for our component did mount, component did update, but what about the component will unmount? So whenever we want to destroy our components, we want to do all the cleanup. So you do the cleanup for the task like you have made some subscription. So whenever you destroy your component, you actually want to unsubscribe your service or the subscription which you have made. So what we will do to demonstrate that, I am actually going to add a set interval function. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to click here and I'm going to add a constant of an interval, and this is equals to set interval, and I will call my show date function, and this show date function will be called after every 1 second. All right, and now if I save it, then you will see that my component get mounted will call every time, because every time the show interval function calls the show date, and we are updating the state of the time function. That's why this time function is getting updated and the use effect function is called again and again. All right. So now we can see that the state is getting updated, but what we want is that we want to destroy this component, the function component. And when we destroy the function component, we actually want to clear this interval. So if you want to clear this interval in your class component, you can clear it in the component will unmount method. But in the use effect, you can actually have here a return, and this return will actually return a arrow function, and this arrow function you can actually, whatever you want to do a cleanup, you can actually add your cleanup here. So I'm going to write a console.log, and here I'm going to add the cleanup of interval, and I will do the cleanup. So I'm going to do a clear interval, and I'm going to use this interval variable here. All right. And now if I save it, then you should be able to see that if I refresh my page, then you will see that every time the use effect runs, first it actually cleanups whatever the previous state was. And after doing all the cleanup, it actually runs the side function. So now if I actually want to toggle this and if I click on it, then you will see that the cleanup is done and no longer the function of this use effect are being executed. If we click again, then we will see the component is mounted and updated, and then the cleanup will run, and then the side effect will run. So this is what the use effect is. So you can use the use effect hook for doing the side effects, like all those we can do in the class component and its lifecycle method. All those side effects can be done with the help of the use effect. All right, guys, so I have a very basic React application with one component, and that is the app component. And inside the app component, I have an input field and a button. The state of the input field is managed using the use state. So if you don't know about the use state, then I have a video on it. You can click on the card above and jump to it directly. And when we click on the button, we just reset the input field. So now if I type it here, the page, then you will be able to see the name here, the page. And when I click on the reset button, it will clear the input field. And if I type it Malvia, it's going to reset the field if I click on the reset button. And what I want is when I click on the reset button, my input field should get cleared, but I also want my focus to be shifted to the input field. And for that, I need to have an access to the DOM element, which is the input element. And this is one of the use case of the useRef to access the DOM elements. So we have the first use case, which is the DOM reference. And to take the reference of the DOM, what we are going to do, we are going to import the useRef like this. So once you import the useRef, I will create a reference variable. So I'm going to name it as input element. and this will be equals to the useRef, and let's give an empty value. And when you actually reference a useRef, it returns an object, and this object has a property called current. So let's do a console.log, and I'm going to write an input element, and let's see what happens. So if I go to the inspect element, and I will go to the console, and inside the console you will see that we get a object, and if I expand this object, then we have a property called current. And when we reference this input element to our input tag, then the input tag will be referenced as a value to this current. So what we are going to do, we are going to reference this input element to our input tag, and on this input tag we have an attribute called ref. So if I write it ref, and let's give the value as input element, and I will save it. And now if I type anything, let me type dip, then you will see that the input tag is now referenced as a value to this current property. And once we have the access to this input element, we can apply focus on it or all the properties that we have on the HTML tag. So what we are going to do, when we click on this reset button, we call this reset input function. So let's go to this reset input function, and inside this input function we are going to set the focus to the input tag. So how we can do that, now we have the reference in the input element dot current holds the input tag, and then you can actually apply a focus. So if I write this and if I save it, then you should be able to see that when I click on this reset button, the input field gets clear and the focus is on the input tag. So if I click on it, then the thing is cleared and we can get the focus. So I can write another thing. If I click on it, I can get the focus. So this is one of the best example of using the useRef to access the DOM elements, and you can also manipulate them. But a lot of developers, I have seen that they manipulate the input values directly with the help of the useRef. So if I do a console.log of input element dot current dot value, and if I save it and when I click on the reset, then I will be able to see the value. But you should never update this value like this input dot current dot value, and this value is equals to the page. So now if I click, sorry, this should be an input element. All right. And now if I click on this reset, then you will see that the input field will have the value of the page, but it is actually not updating our state. So we should never use useRef to update the input values directly. So it's always better that we use a state to manage the input values. All right. So the next example I want to show you is that how you can use useRef to store the previous state. So we can use the useRef to hold the previous state. So for that, let's create a random counter. So I'm going to create a constant, and this will be equals to a counter. I'm going to give it as a set counter, and let's make use of the useState. And I'm going to give the initial value as 0. All right. Now let's go here and write an counter. So I'm going to create a div, and I'm going to give an h1 tag, and inside the h1 tag I'm going to name it as a random counter, and this will be having a value of the counter, whatever the value of the counter is. And what we are going to do, we are going to create a button so that we can get a random counter every time when we click on this button. So I'm going to write a on click, and inside this on click I'm going to do and take an event, and this event will actually do a set counter, and to get the random number, so I'm going to do a math dot seal, and inside that I'm going to do a math dot random, and I'm going to multiply this by 100 so that I can get a random number every time when I click between 0 to 100. All right, and let's give it as a generate number. All right. And now if I click on this generate number, then you will be see that we get a random number every time when we click on this generate number. But now I want to store the previous state, because whenever I click on the generate number, my components get re-rendered, and I want to hold a value between this re-rendered. So you want to hold a value between the re-renders, so you cannot use the use state, because if the value of the state changes, the component will get re-rendered, and we want to hold this value between the component re-renders. So for that we can make use of the useRef. And I'm going to create a constant which will hold the previous counter ref, and this will be equals to the use ref. And initially I'm going to give it as an empty. All right, and let's change this to counter. All right, and now what I will do, I will create a use effect. So inside this use effect, so let's import a use effect first. So let's import the use effect like this. And here I'm going to write the use effect. So let's write an use effect. This use effect will have an arrow function. And when we want to call this use effect, whenever the random counter changes. So the random counter changes at the counter. All right. And when the random counter changes, I want to store current value of the counter in my previous counter ref. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to do a previous counter ref dot current, because current is the property where you actually hold the value between the re-renders, and this will be equals to the counter. All right, now we can preserve the value, we can hold this mutable value, and now we just want to print this value. So let's go here, and I'm going to write a type of this previous random counter dot current if this is not equals to the undefined, because the first time the value will be the empty, so we don't want to show that value. So I'm going to do an undefined here. All right, and then I'm going to do an h2 tag, and inside this h2 tag I'm going to print my value. So this will be the previous counter, and then we can print here the previous counter dot current. All right, and now if I save it, then let's see now the initial value of the previous counter is 0, and now if I click on it, it gets changed to 69. So now if I generate a new number, this new number will get changed, but the previous counter value will be the 69. So if I click on it, so it's not working, so we made some mistakes. So let's go to the inspect and let's go to the console, and in the console I can see that I have made a mistake here, so this should be an array. All right. Okay, now let's save it. And now if I click on it, then you will be see that I can have the previous value. If I click on the 56, I get the previous value. If I click on the 52, I can hold the previous value. So this is where the useRef is not only used for the DOM access, but you can also hold the previous values between the re-renders. So what happens when the value of the random counter changes, the component actually re-renders, but you can hold the value in the useRef.current property, and this is how important the useRef is, and this is one of the use case of using the useRef. So these are the three use cases. So the first one is the DOM reference. Whenever you want to manipulate your DOM or you want to access the DOM element, you can make use of the useRef. The second use case is if you want to hold the mutable value, or you want to store the previous state, then you can make use of the useRef. So a lot of misconception is that useRef is only used to access the DOM, but no, it is also used to hold the mutable values between the re-renders. So whenever the value of the useRef changes, the component doesn't re-render. Only the useState value changes, then the component gets re-render. All right, guys, so I have a very basic React application set up, and I have a single component, which is our app component. And in this app component, what I am doing is I have taken a state variable of a counter. So we are creating a counter, and I have two buttons for the counter. One is for the increment of the counter, and another one is the decrement of the counter. And what I am doing is whatever the value of the counter is, I am passing this counter value into a function of a factorial, which actually going to calculate the factorial. So if you pass 5, it's going to give you a factorial of 5, which will be a 120. And then I have an input tag, and I'm managing the state of the input tag with name and set name. So if I demonstrate to you, then right now the factorial of 1 is 1. If I click on the increment, the factorial of 2 is 2. Similarly, 3, 4, 5. So in this way, you can calculate the factorial, and if we decrement it, it works. And for the input tag, if I type anything the page, then we just display the name, whatever we are typing in the input field. All right, so now everything is sorted, but what this useMemo hook is and when we should use the useMemo hook. Now just take an example that if this factorial function which we have written is kind of a heavy operation, it's going to take some time and then it's going to calculate the factorial and it's going to display the value. Right now if we click it, we get it very instantly the value because we are not creating any of the heavy operation on this function. But let's change this function into a heavy operation. So for that, what I will do, I'm going to add a while loop which is going to make this function a little bit slow. So I'm going to create a let I is equals to 0, and then while I is less than, let's give some random big number so that it gets a little slow, and then we will do I plus plus. So now we have created this function a little bit heavy operation. And now let's see what actually happens. So when I click on the increment, you will notice that it takes some time to update the value here. So if I click it again, it's going to take some time. If I click it again, it's going to take some time. If I click it again, and it's going to take some time. So now this heavy operation is being done. But the problem here will be that if I actually try to change the value in my input box, you will notice that if I do a back press, then the screen gets a little bit freeze and it takes some time to change the value. And that should not happen because we are not doing any heavy operation when we are interacting with this input box. So this is where we can actually make use of a useMemo function. And this useMemo hook will memoize the function which is doing the heavy operation. So what we can do, we will go here and we are first going to import the useMemo hook. So I'm going to write a useMemo, and then we are having this function which is doing the heavy operation, and that is the function is actually causing the delay or the slowness. So if I go here and do a back press, then my state is getting updated, and whenever the state gets updated, the whole component re-renders. And this re-rendering of the whole component is actually causing a problem because every time the component gets re-rendered, the factorial function will be called, and it's going to take some time for the execution even though the value of the counter is unchanged. So for that, we are going to use the useMemo. So we are going to wrap this factorial function into the useMemo. So you can write useMemo, and this useMemo will be an arrow function. So let me make an arrow function. And like the other hooks, like the useEffect, we can actually pass the dependency on what value we need to make this useMemo function run. So what we will do, I'm going to pass a dependency, and this dependency is our counter. Whenever the counter is changed, we need to execute the factorial function. Whenever the name state gets changed, we don't need to call this factorial function. In that case, the value will be coming from the memoized function. So now let's go and remove this, and this is going to return the factorial function. All right, now I'm saving it, and now let's try again what happens. So if I click on the increment, the counter value is changing and the memoization function will actually call the factorial to do the calculation. So if I click again, it's going to take some time. Now if I interact with my input text, then it should be immediately. So now you can see that it is fast and it's more optimized as compared to the before. So in such cases, the useMemo function is very helpful. So this is where you will use the useMemo, but that doesn't mean that for every function you are going to use the useMemo. First, you will always write your code without using the useMemo, and then you will realize that on which part we need to optimize so that we can use the useMemo, or we are making some unnecessary function calls even though the value is not changing. The second use case of the useMemo is the referential equality. So in JavaScript, we have two things. We have the primitive data types and we have the non-primitive data types. So whenever we make an equality on the primitive data types, they are always checked based on their values. But when we do the equality on the non-primitive data types like the arrays and objects, they are always done the equality check based on their references. So let me give you a quick demo of it. So I will go to the inspect element. I will go to the console, and I'm going to write a variable a is equals to 5, and I'm going to write another variable b is equals to 5, and now I'm going to do an equality operator on a is equals to b. Then it's going to give me a true because a and b are the variables holding primitive data type value. But now let's go and write a is equals to, I'm going to write 1 comma 2 comma 3. So a is an array with 1 2 3 as values, and let's write a b. So b will also be having the same values. So now in this case, a and b actually holds the same values, but their references are different in the memory location. So if I do a equals to b, then it's going to give me false and not true. Similar case is for the object. So if I write a and let's write the object name as the page. All right, and I'm going to write b and I'm going to give the value of b similarly name as the page. All right, and now if I do a equals to b, then you will see that we are getting a false. So this use memo is also useful when we need to do a referential equality. And to demonstrate the referential equality, what I'm going to do, I will actually going to change this part. So here I'm going to introduce an hr, and after the hr I'm going to create a new component. So I'm going to create a component with display name. All right, and in this component we are going to pass a prop of name, and this prop will be equal to the state of the name. So I'm going to write name here. All right, and now we don't want to print it here, we are going to print this in the new component. So I'm going to remove this and I will have to make a new component. So let's write a component of display name, and this display name will be an arrow function. And inside this, I'm going to write a console.log, and I'm going to print here as rendered so that we can see it in the console whenever this component is getting rendered. All right. And then now let's return the JSX. So our JSX will be the name, and we are going to take this name as a prop. So I'm going to do a destructuring and I'm going to write here as name. All right. So we have done it. And now if I refresh it, and if I click here, and you will see that I'm writing up the page, and the page is coming from the display name component. So if we go to the inspect element, then you will see that the render is getting printed. All right, but now you will notice one thing, that when I make an increment, so in that case also the render is getting called, and when I click again you will see that again the render is calling. And this is because that when you change the counter, the whole component is getting re-rendered, and when it is get re-rendered, the display name component actually gets a props. And even though the props are same, but a props is an object, so the objects are always made equality based on their reference. That's why every time we will have a new instance of the prop even though the props are not changed. So in this case also we can make use of a use memo. So what we will do, we are going to make this function into a use memo function. So I'm going to write a use memo. All right, and this use memo will have a arrow function. All right, and inside this arrow function what we are going to do, we are going to have our props. So our prop name was name, and then we are just going to take this and we are going to add it here. So we have made this component as a use memo, and now if I save it, then we are going to see that we have an error, and that error is that the react hook use memo cannot be called at the top level. React hooks can be called inside a function component or a custom hook function. So even though we have this display name of function component, we cannot make use of the use memo, and that is because we are calling it at the top level. So for that, what we are going to do, we are going to make use of a react.memo. All right, and now if I save it, then we should be fine. So now if I remove this and if I type this, then we see that the render will be called because we are having the name property is getting changed. But now you will notice that if I click on the increment, even though the component is getting re-rendered, but the props are still the same. So in this time we are making a check on the props, and the referential equality of the prop is true, that the props are not changed. So that's why we are not able to see this render console here. So this is how you can actually make use of the use memo. So these are the two use cases where you want to optimize the expensive operation, or you want to do a referential equality. In both the cases you can make use of the use memo hook. So just to be careful that you should never use memo directly. First you write all the code as it is, and then you will start thinking that you need to make some of the functions to be optimized, then you use the use memo. Because when you use memo for every function or everything, then it's going to give you a performance overhead, which is not good for your application. All right, guys, so I have a very basic application setup and I'm using the same example code which we saw in our last video, the useMemo hook. So if you have missed the video on the useMemo hook, then I recommend you to watch that first. You can click on the card above and jump to it directly. So what we have here is we have the same factorial function, which is an expensive operation. So for that, we have done the memoization of the factorial function. So this is what we have done here. We have made the use of useMemo to memorize the factorial function, which is an heavy operation. And then what we have the input element and we are managing the state of the input element using the state variable name and set name. So when I click on the increment, it takes the incremental value and then the value is passed to the factorial function to calculate the factorial of that particular counter. So if I make it 2, then it's going to calculate the factorial of 2. 3, then it's going to make a factorial of 3, which is 6. And when I type something in the input text, then the text is displayed here. And this value we are being displayed from another component, a function component, which is the display name. So we pass the value in the display name and then the name is being printed in the display name component. And we are also using the memoization for this component as our props are not changing every time whenever we click on the increment or the decrement. So we are memoizing this component so that our props have a referential equality. So till now everything is clear, but now there is a scenario that in this display name, instead of passing the name, which is the value, you need to pass a function. And in that case, how we will do it? So if I want to pass a function here, so let's create a function. So I'm going to write constant display name, and this will be equals to an arrow function. And this actually returns the name. All right, and now we have a scenario that we need to pass this display name in our display name component. So what I will do, I'm going to change this to display name and I will change this to display name. All right, and we will just remove this memoization for this display name component. We don't want it. All right, and instead of this name, we are going to have a display name as a prop, and then we are going to have an use effect so that we can get the value. So let me import a use effect. So I'm going to import a use effect and I will go here and then I'm going to add a state variable. So I'm going to take a state variable as value and I will take it as a set value. And this will be equals to the use state and the initial value is an empty string. All right. And from the use effect, so whenever we get the display name as a prop, we need to have a use effect. And this use effect will run some logic. Maybe it calls some API calls or it do some logic based on the display name function. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to set the value based on whatever the display name function is. All right. And after setting the value, I'm just going to do a console.log component rendered. All right, and this will only have a dependency, will be the dependent on the display name function. So I'm going to write display name. All right, and this value now will become the value. So I'm going to copy this and I'm going to add the value here. All right, so now we have done it, whatever we wanted. And now let's go to the inspect element. And now let's see what actually happening. So I'm going to the console. I will clear the console. And for now, I will just remove this console. We don't want it. All right. And now you will see that whenever I type anything in my input element, then my app component gets re-rendered and a new instance of a display name function is generated. And this is passed to my display name component. When it is passed, we get a new instance of display name. And then we run a use effect and we print the value, which is the my name is Dipesh, which is very clear. But now the problem is whenever I click on this increment or a decrement, so when I click on the increment, my app component re-renders again because the state of the counter is changed. And when the app component re-renders again, there is a new instance of a display name is being created. And this new instance is passed in the display name component. And then we get printing again, the use effect will run and this will. So every time when I do an increment or a decrement, this app component will get re-renders and it's going to give me every time a new display name function which will be passed in my component. So there is a problem and we can solve this problem with the use of the use callback react hook. So what we can do here is let's go and import the use callback hook. So I'm going to import a use callback like this. And then what we can do, we are going to actually wrap this display name function in our use callback. So if I write a constant here, and this constant is equals to the display name, and then we are going to use a use callback, and this use callback will actually take the function which we want to memoize. So we need to memoize this whole function. So I'm going to copy this whole function, I'm going to cut it, and I'm going to add this whole function here. All right, and now we can remove this. We don't want this. And this function is only dependent on the name state. So I'm going to add the dependency as name. All right, and now let's save it, and now let's try it again. So now I clear the console, and if I write the page here, then it's obvious that the state name will get updated and a new instance of display name will be generated with the new value of name, and this will be passed to a display name function, and we get to print this display name. But now let's see what happens when we actually change the counter. So if I click on the counter, then you will see that the counter is increasing, but my component is not getting rendered anymore. So if I clear it and if I click on it, then you will see that the app component is getting re-rendered, but it's not generating a new value of the display name function. And that's why we are not able to getting this. And this is how we can actually optimize our display name component from getting the new value of the display name function again and again. Now you will have a question that what is a difference between a use memo and a use callback, because in use memo also we were doing the same thing. So the difference here is you will see that the memoization of the function, if you want to memoize the function, you make use of a callback, use callback. But if you want to memoize the value of a function, then you just do a use memo. And let me give you a quick demonstration. So you will see that we have make use of the use memo for this result. And now let me just do a console.log, and if I log my result, so this is the use memo, and let me log the result here. All right, and I'm going to do a same log for our callback. So this is our callback, and I'm going to write here use callback. So this will become callback, and this value will become the display name. All right, and now if I save it, then you will be see that if I click on the increment, I actually get the memo as the value and not the factorial function. But for the other one, the callback one, you will see that we get the actual callback function. And that is the main difference between the use memo and use callback. But when we make use of use callback, we get some additional features to use it. So now if I want that, let me now remove these logs. And what we can do is, now suppose this is my callback, and in this callback, if I want to pass some argument, so let me pass an argument here as I'm going to write hello. All right, I need to pass an argument. Then I can use this argument inside this use callback function, and I'm going to take it as greeting, and I'm going to return here greeting plus the name. Let me add a space here. So I'm going to add a space. All right. And now you can see that if I refresh my page, then I already have a hello, which I passed it from my callback function. And if I type anything, then it's going to write hello the page, or if I type hello Malvia, anything, it will type the hello. So this is what the additional feature you get it when you use the callback. But you should always be careful by using the use memo or you use the use callback, that they always have a performance overhead, because whenever you make use of this use memo or use callback, they actually take some memory to hold the values whenever the app is getting re-rendered. So initially you never make use of these things. Once you write all the code and you feel that there is an optimization required for the component re-rendering, in that case only you should apply the use memo or the use callback. And one more thing is, when you make use of the use callback, it actually gives you a referential equality on the functions. So it's not going to create a new instance of the function every time. When you make the use callback, it memoizes the function, and the same function is being returned every time. So that's where you get an referential equality for the functions as well. All right, so that's all you need to know about the use callback and the difference between the use memo and use callbacks. All right, guys, so I have a very basic React application setup. And in this, I have three components, the app component. And inside the app component, I have two other components, which is the C component, a class component, and an F component, which is a function component. And in the app component, I have created a counter using the useState. So if you don't know about the useState, then I have a video on it. You can click on the card above and jump to it directly. So we have two functions, the increment function and the decrement function. So on click of the button, we do the increment of the counter, and on click of the other button, we do the decrement of the counter. So till now, it's a very simple counter application. So now if I click on the increment, we increment the counter. If I click on the decrement, we decrement the counter. Now what I want here is that I want to display my value of the counter in my function component and in my class component. So in order to do that, I need to pass the value of the counter as a props. So what we are going to do, I'm going to pass props here. So let's name the prop as counter, and the value of the prop will be a counter. And I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to do the same thing for the class component as well. Now let's go to the function component, and inside this function and we are going to receive the props. So let's destructure the prop as counter, and here I'm going to print the value of the counter. So I'm going to do an h2, and I'm going to do a counter here. So we should be able to see a counter in the function component, and the same thing we can do in the class component. So I'm going to write an h2 tag here, and inside the h2 tag we can get the value of the counter as this dot props dot counter, and we should be able to see the counter. And now if I increment the counter, we can see the value in the function component and in the class component getting updated. Now just imagine that the function component is having one more child component, and you want to access the counter value in the child component as well. So if we go to the function component, so I already have created a child component. So let's use this f child. So I'm going to use this f child. All right, and we need to display the counter in the f child as well. So what we will do, we again need to pass it as a prop. So if I pass it as a prop here, which will be a counter, and if I do it a counter here, and then let's destructure the props here. So this will become a counter, and then we can print this value of the counter, which will be this. And if I save it, then we should be able to see the value here as well. But the problem here is this is the prop drilling, where you are passing a prop from your app component to your function component, and then from your function component to your function child component. And this can be solved very easily with the help of the context, where you create a context and then that context can be passed to any of the child directly. So what we are going to do, we are going to create a context. So let me create a new file for the context. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to create a new file, and the name of the new file will be countercontext.js. All right, and to use the context we need to import a create context. So let's import a create context, and that will be coming from react, and we will just export the constant. So I'm going to export the constant of counter context, and this will be equals to the create context, and I'm going to pass the initial value as null. All right, so when we create the context, it actually returns us two things. One is the context provider, and another one is the context consumer. So first let's go to the app.js, and this app.js here we are going to have the context provider, counter context, and this counter context will be a provider. So this is how we can add the context provider. And now whatever the child elements we want to pass the values, we will be adding these as the child of the providers. So this is how we can add the child of the providers, and you can pass a value here. So let me add a simple value. So I'm going to pass a value of hello context. All right, so we have passed the value of the hello context, and now we need to consume this value into our function component and our class component. So if we want to do it in the class component, so let's go to the class component, and we need to add a context provider. So I'm going to write a counter. So this will be a counter dot consumer. All right, and inside the consumer we can access the value which we have passed. So I'm going to access the value as value, and this will be a function, and inside this function we can return our JSX. So I'm going to return an h2 tag, and inside the h2 tag I can actually add the value. So if I add the value here, then we should be able to see the hello context. And if we want to do the same thing in a function component, that is where we will use the use context. So the use context tools make it very simple to access the value of the context. We don't need to create all context consumer and all this stuff. So let's go to the function component, and inside the function component, I will simply going to create a variable with a value, and this value will be equals to the use context. So I will import the use context like this. And inside the use context, we are going to pass our context, which is the counter context. All right. And now if I simply copy this and I just add the value, then I should be able to get the value, which is the hello context. And this way you can also use the context value in our child component as well directly. So I'm going to add this, and if I add the value here, so I will be able to add the hello context in my child component. So this is how powerful the context API is. You can directly pass your data. Let's take it to the next level. So what we are going to do here is, now instead of passing this value hard coded, we actually want to pass the value of the counter. So I'm going to remove this, and I'm just going to add a counter value here. So I will remove this, and this will become a counter value. And now let's remove this. We don't want the props. We are not passing the props anymore. So we don't want the counter context file now. So I will just close this down. And in the F component, now we have the access of the value to the counter. So I'm going to remove this, and I'm going to remove this as well. All right, and similar in the function component, we already have the value, and we are passing this value as the counter value. All right, so now if I click on it, then we should be able to see that our counter is now getting updated in each of the component. But when you create a global state, what features you need? You need to access the value of your global state in any of the component, and you should also be able to update your global state from any of the component. So if I want to update my counter from my function component or from my child component, then I should be able to do it. So the use context hook is more neat and clear as compared to the using of the context consumer in the class component. So now let's remove this class component. We don't want this now. All right. And the next thing we need, that we need to update our counter from our function component and our function child component. So what we'll do, I'm going to pass an object here. All right. And this object will contain the counter, and I'm going to add the set counter. All right. So now I have passed the counter and the set counter, and we can go to our function component, and inside the function component, I'm going to change this as counter, and this will become a set counter. All right, I will copy this, and I'm going to change this here as well. So this has also become a counter, and this will become a set counter. And let's remove the props. We don't have any props now. So I'm going to remove this, and I'm going to remove this as well. All right, and this counter, we are printing it here in the H2. So I'm going to add this. Let's remove this as well. And this counter, we are printing it here. So I'm going to add this here as well. All right. So now if I click on it, the counter is still working, but we need to update the counter. So what we'll do, I'm going to create a button in the component. So I'm just going to copy this. All right. And I'm going to add my button here, and we will change this increment so we should be able to update our counter. So this will be an arrow function, and I'm going to write a set counter, and inside this I can do a counter plus 1. All right, I'm going to copy the same thing, and I will add it in my child counter, because I want that from my child counter also I should be able to update my state. So I'm going to add this here, and this time I will do a decrement here. All right, so this will become -1, and this I will change to decrement. All right. So now you can see that we can now access our counter in any of the child using the use context hook. If I click on the decrement, then it will update the global state, and it will get reflected immediately in all of the components that is using the global state. So this is how we can make use of the use context hook to access the value and to update the values. So this helps us to solve the problem of the prop drillings, where we don't need to pass the props to a multiple nested level, and we can also update the state from any of the components and access the values in any of the components. Alright guys, so I have a very basic React application with one component, which is the app component. And inside the app component, I have a very basic example of a counter example, and we are managing the state of this counter example with the help of the useState React hook. So if I click on the counter increment, it's going to increment the counter. If I click on the decrement, it's going to decrement the counter. But the thing is, use state is not the only way to manage the component state. We have one more hook which helps us to manage the state, and that is the use reducer. So the use reducer hook is more preferable over the use state hook whenever you want to manage a complex component state. So this use reducer hook works very similar with the one we saw in the Redux. So if you are not familiar with the Redux, then I have a video on it. I will add the link in the description below, or you can also click on the card above and jump to it directly. So what we are going to do, we are going to take a look on the two examples. First, we are going to convert this simple counter example with the help of the use reducer, and then we are going to see that how use reducer can help us to manage more complex state. So now what I'm going to do, so I'm going to change this use state into the use reducer. So let's import the use reducer first. So you can import the use reducer like this, and then I'm going to write a constant, and this constant will be equals to the use reducer. And this use reducer takes two parameters. The first is the reducer function, which is going to take the state and the action, and based on the actions is going to change the state. And the second parameter is the initial value of our state. So I'm going to write a reducer here, and the other parameter will be the initial state. So whatever the initial state we need to assign. So in our case, the initial state will be 0. So let's add a constant here, and I'm going to write an initial state, and this initial state will be equals to the 0. And for the reducer, we are going to create a function. So I'm going to create a reducer function, and this reducer function will take two parameters. The first one is the state, and another one will be the action which we want to perform on this state. And this returns two things. The first one is the state which we can use to display the data. And the second one is the dispatch function, which is going to dispatch our action. So I'm going to write a dispatch here. All right, and now we have the use reducer with a state and a dispatch. And next what we are going to do is whenever we click on this increment button or decrement button, we need to dispatch an action. So let's change this. So this will be a function, and this is going to dispatch the action, and our action will have two things, the type and the payload. So for now we don't have any payload, so I'm just going to do a type, and the type will be increment. Okay, and let me copy this. I'm going to add it here, and this will become decrement. So now we have the increment and decrement dispatch function. So let's go to the reducer and write our switch cases. So I'm going to write a switch case, and this will be action dot type. So if our action dot type is equals to the increment, in that case, what we need to do, we need to make a state increment by 1. So I'm going to return the state, and I'm going to add 1 to the state. All right, and for the decrement, I'm just going to copy this again, and I'm going to add it. I'm going to do a little bit of justification, and this will become decrement, and I will do -1. And for the default, I can just throw an error. So I will throw a new error. All right, so now we have set up our reducer, and now we can just comment this use state part, and instead of the counter, we are going to make use of the state to display our counter. So I'm going to copy this and I'm going to add it. All right, and it's giving us error for the set counter and the counter as we have no longer the functions. So let's comment this part as well. Okay, so now if I click on the increment, I will still get the increment. And if I click on the decrement, I will still be able to decrement my counter. So this is how you can manage the state using the use reducer as well. So use state is not the only option, but this is very simple example, and this is not a perfect case for the use reducer. Let's see another application where we are going to make a little bit complex state, and that application will be the add contact and delete contact. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to do a little bit of modification. So the first modification I'm going to do, that my initial state, I want my initial state to be an array, and initially I'm going to have a one record. So I'm going to write an ID, and this ID will have a date dot now, so that we can have a unique ID for every contact. And then I'm going to have the name. So I'm going to just write a name as the page, and I'm going to have an email. So I'm going to write the email as thepage@gmail.com. All right, so I have the record now, and what we want for this, we want the input fields where we can actually enter the name and the email address. So to manage the name and the email address, I will make use of the state. So let's go and write a contact of state, name, and set name. This will be equals to the use state, and initially I don't want to pass any value, so I'm just going to give an empty string. All right, and for the email also, I'm just going to copy paste, and I'm going to change this to email. So this will become email, and this will become set email. And for here, we need to create the input fields. So let's create the input fields. So I'm going to create a simple form. So this will be my form, and my form will contain an input type of text. Placeholder I'm going to give as name, and value I'm going to give as the name, and we are going to have an on change. So on change, I need to set my set name. So this will be an arrow function, and I'm going to do a set name, and the set name will be e dot target dot value. All right, so now we have the input field for the name, and the next input field we are going to do it for the email. So I'm just going to copy this, and I'm add here. So I'm going to change this to email. This will get changed to email, and this will become email. All right, so now we have set the name and the email, and whenever we want to submit the form, we need to add this contact in our state. So I'm going to write an on submit here. So whenever I submit a form, I need to call a function which will be an add contact. All right, and I need to create a function for the add contact. So I'm going to go here, and I'm going to write a constant add contact. This will be equals to an arrow function. All right, so now we have the add contact, and the other thing we need to create is a button to submit our form. So I'm going to create a button here. So this will be a button for add contact, and we don't need this increment and decrement. So let me remove them. And in our reducer, what we need to do for the reducer, we are going to have a state, which will the initial state will be this one. And for the action, we are going to have an addition of the contact and a deletion of the contact. So let me change this to add. So this will become add, and this is going to become a delete contact. All right, and we can do one thing to display our contacts. We can actually write some JSX that will display our contacts. So I'm going to write a div, and this div will have an UL. So I'm going to add a state here, then state dot map, and inside that it will going to give me a contact, and I can have an arrow function, and here I can write the li list, and inside the list I will write an h2 tag, and this h2 will contain my contact dot name. So we have two fields, we have the name and we have the email ID. So I can write the name here, and I will, for now I will just give a key here. So this key will become contact dot ID. All right, and we just need to return this. So let's return this JSX. So I'm going to return the JSX. So now you can see that we get the name as the page, and we also need to make this as a button. So I'm going to add a button here. So this will be a button, and this button will have a add contact. All right, and now if I console the state, so let me do a console of the state. So I'm going to do a console log of the state. So far I haven't done anything much. I have just created the JSX for the input fields. I have created a button, and I am having the initial state, which is the state with one record. So I'm just going to display that record with the help of the JSX. So if I go to the inspect, and inside the inspect, I will go to the console, then we can see that we have one array with a value, which is the initial state. Now what we want is whenever we click on the add contact, we need to submit the form and add the contact in our state. So for that, what we can do is, so let's go to the add contact button. So here we have the add contact button, and if I click on this add contact, then you will see that our page is getting refreshed. So we can avoid that part if I do event dot prevent default so that our page will not get refreshed. And when we submit the form, so I need to take an event as an argument here. All right. So now we need to submit the form. So when we submit the form, we need to empty the values in the input tag. So I'm going to do a set name, and I'm going to set the set name as empty again string. And for the email, I'm going to set the empty string again. So now what we want to do, we need to dispatch an action for the addition of the contact in our state. So let's dispatch a action, and this action will contain two fields. One will be the type, and our type will be the add, and there will be a payload. So we need to define our payload. So for that, I will just create a simple object of a contact, and this object will have the ID. So the ID will be date dot now. So this is going to give us a unique date stamp. And then there will be a name. So this name will be equal to the name of our state which we are using. So this is equals to the name. And for the email will be equal to the email. And since we are using ES6, I'm just going to remove this as the key and the value are same. So we can eliminate it. So I'm going to remove this, and I'm going to remove this. So this is my new contact. And when I do a dispatch, I need to pass this new contact. So I'm going to add this new contact here. All right, so now I am dispatching the action whenever I want to add my contact. So now let's go to the reducer. So here in the reducer, what we want to return is we want to get the state, the current state, and then we need to add the new contact to the current state. So here I'm going to return an array. So I'm going to do a spread operator to get the initial state. And once I get the initial state, I'm going to write action dot payload. And this action dot payload will be my new contact. All right. So now if I save it, and let's try to submit something. So I'm going to write the page here. So we already have the page, right? So I'm going to remove this, and I'm going to write a test, and this will be equals to test@gmail.com. And if I click on the submit, then we see that now in our state we have two objects, and we can also see that the new contact is now added to the list. So if I add more, so let me write a malvia, and I'm going to do a malvia@gmail.com. And if I click on the add, I'm going to add one more state. So this is how you can actually manage the complex state with the help of useReducer, and it creates very easy and simple to use. So it's more similar to the pattern we follow in the Redux. All right, so now let's add the delete as well. So what I will do, we are going to create a delete button. So inside this, we have a contact name. I'm going to also print the contact email. So let me add an email, and then I'm going to add a button. So I'm going to create a div, and inside this div, I'm going to add a button. All right. And when we click on this delete button, we need to dispatch an action. So I'm going to write a delete here, and to dispatch an action, we're going to make a function, and then we're going to write a dispatch. All right, and in the dispatch, we need to pass the action. So the type of our action will be delete. So let me add delete. And for the payload, we just need the ID of the contact in order to delete the contact. So I'm going to pass an object with will have the ID. So this ID is the contact.id. All right, so now we have the dispatch function for the delete as well. Let's go to our reducer function. So inside the reducer function, we have a case for the delete. And when we delete it, we want to return a new array with a deleted contact. So this we can get it with the help of the array method filter. So I'm going to filter my results based on the ID. So I'm going to get my current state, and then I'm going to apply the filter on it. So I will add the filter. This is going to give me a contact. And then what I want to return here is I want to return those contacts which doesn't match the ID. So I'm going to take the contact.id, and this should not be equals to the action.payload.id. All right, now if I save it, and we can see that now we have the three records in our contact array. And if we want to delete it, and if I click on the delete, then I will only have the two records. If I delete test as well, I'm going to have only one record, and I can delete the initial record as well. So this is how you can make use of the useReducer to manage your complex component state. And With the help of this useReducer and the context API, you can really do a powerful global state management for your project. So we will see this in our one of the videos where we can combine the useReducer hook and the useContext hook, and we are going to create a powerful global state. All right, guys, so I have a very simple React application with a single component, which is our app component. And inside the app component, we are using our favorite counter example again. So here we are using the counter example and we are managing the state with the use state. So if you don't know about the use state, I have a video on it. You can click on the card above and jump to it directly. Then we have two functions. One is the increment of the counter and other one is the decrement of the counter. And when we click on the button, we actually call the increment function or the decrement function. So right now, if I click on the increment, the counter increments, and if I click on the decrement, the counter decrements. But what I don't want all the logic of my counter and everything in my app component. I want to create a custom hook where I can pass the initial value, and the custom hook should expose the value and the increment and decrement function. So to create a custom hook, what we will do, we are going to create a new file. So I will go here and I'm going to create a new file. And it's a convention that whenever you create a custom hook, you always use the same convention like the use state, use effect. So we are going to name it as use counter. So I'm going to name it as use counter.js. Okay, so we have the use counter.js, our custom hook file. And the first thing we will do, we are going to do an export default and we will write the function, and our function name is use counter. All right, so now we have the function. So while creating a custom React hook, we can make use of the inbuilt React hooks. Like if I want to use the use state, then I can use the use state in my use counter. So what I will do, I'm going to import the use state. So I'm going to import the use state from React. So I'm going to write a use state here. So let's add the use state. All right, and we will do the same thing what we have done it here. So here we take a counter, we do a set counter for the use state. So let's do the same thing. I'm going to create a constant and I'm going to have a value, and then I'm going to have a set value function. So this will be a set value and I will make use of the use state. So this use state will get an initial value. So let me add an initial value here. So I will add an initial value, and our custom hook will get the initial value when we are going to use this custom hook. All right, so we have added the initial value, and what I want that my custom hook should return three things. So I'm going to make a return, and it's going to return the value itself, which we want to display it on the screen. And then it should also expose the increment function and it should expose the decrement function. So I'm going to write here as decrement. All right, so we have the increment and the decrement function, and I made a little bit typos. So yep. So now we need to write this increment and decrement function. So what we can do, we are going to create a constant, and that constant will be equals to increment. And this function will be exactly same as the increment and decrement we have written it here. So we can actually take it here. We can copy this and we can actually add it here. So I'm going to paste it here. And instead of the set counter, this value will become the set value. And here we need to add the set value. All right, so now we have created our custom counter React hook. Now let's try and use this hook inside our app.js. So inside my app.js, I'm just going to comment this out for now. And what I will do, I'm going to create a constant. And what are we exposing? We are exposing the value of the counter. We are having the increment function, and we will have the decrement function. So let's add the decrement function, and this will be equals to the use counter. So this is counter, I have imported it, and I need to pass an initial value. So let's pass an initial value as 0. All right, I will save it. So this is giving me an error in the use counter. So let's go to the use counter, and here this counter will get changed to the value. So I'm going to copy this value here and let's add it here. All right, so now we have done it, and now let's try it. If I click on the increment, it should increment the number. So is it working? And if I do a decrement, it's working. So this is how we have created this custom hook for the use counter. Now we can make more modification in it. So let me do one more thing. If I want to add one more button, which is the reset button, then we can do that. So what I will do, I'm just going to copy this and I'm going to add it here, and I will make this as a reset. So this, and I'm going to expose a function for the reset as well. And let's take one more function, which will be a reset function, and we need to add a reset function here. So let's add the reset here, and let's create a function. So I'm going to create a constant that will be equals to a reset, and we are going to create an arrow function, and that is going to return new value. So the new value will be my initial value. So let me add this initial value. All right, and now if I click on the reset, it will get reset to 0. So increment, decrement, and reset. So this will reset to 0. Now we can actually enhance this counter by taking a one more value, and let's take a value of 5. And what we will do that whenever I click on the increment, the counter should get increment by 5. And when I do a decrement, the counter should get decrement by 5. So you can take one more value here, whatever value you want, and you will add the same value here. And then what you will do, and instead of adding 1, you will add the value which you get it from the initial counter. So this is how you can actually enhance it more. So this was one of the example. The other example I want to show you is a little bit more complex as compared to this. This was a very simple one. So I'm going to revert this. We are not doing that part. So I'm going to remove this, and I will also remove this as well. All right, and let's remove this here. And I have already created one more component, which is the screen component. So if I open the screen component, so right now the screen component only returns a screen component as h1. And then we have that we are in the XXX screen. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to import this screen component here. So let's add the screen component from dot screen component, and I will add this screen component here. All right, so I'm going to add the screen component here. All right, so as soon as I add it, it says that we are in the triple X screen. So what we want is we need to calculate the screen width, and based on the screen width, we need to decide that whether we are in a small device, a medium device, or a large device. So as soon as I change my screen width, it should get automatically changed to a medium, large, or small. So for this, we are going to write a custom hook. So let's write a custom hook. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to create a new file. And this new file, I'm going to name it as useScreen.js. All right, so we have the useScreen.js, and here let's export the function. So I'm going to export default function, and the name of the function will be useScreen. And this useScreen is not going to take any initial value here first, and we also need to make use of the useState. So I'm going to import the useState from React. All right, and then what I will do, I'm going to create a constant. I'm going to say it as screen size, and this will become set screen size. And I'm going to name it use state. So there is no initial value. And what I'm going to return from here is I'm only going to return the screen size. So let me return the screen size. All right, and this screen size will be the value whether it's a large screen, medium screen, or a small screen. So to check the screen whether it's a small, medium, or large, we need to create a function which is going to run every time, and it's going to check the screen size as soon as we increase or decrease the screen width. So I will write a constant, and my function is the check screen size. This will be an arrow function. All right, and then inside this, what I will do, I'm going to write an if condition. If the window dot inner width, if this is greater than 992, then what I want to return, I want to return the set screen size, and this screen size should be equals to the large. All right, and let me copy this for the medium and the small as well. So I'm going to copy this 2 times. So this will become medium. So I'm going to make it as medium. This will become small, and this will become large. So for the condition to return a small screen, this screen I'm going to make it at, if the screen size is less than 600, then it should return a small screen. And if the screen width is less than 992 and it's greater than 600, then we should be in a medium screen. All right, so I will change this to 600. All right, so now we have this check screen, and we have made the conditions that if the screen width is between this width, then we should have the large, medium, or small scale respectively. Now what we will do, I'm going to make use of a use effect. So let me import a use effect. All right, and I'm going to write a use effect, and inside the use effect, so let's add a arrow function, and this will be only called the one time whenever the component is mounted. So I'm going to add the empty array here as dependency, and we are going to call a check screen size function, and we will also do an event listener that whenever we change the width, we are going to continuously check the screen size. So I'm going to write an window dot add event listener, and the name of my event is on resize of my screen. I need to call the check screen size. All right, and let's add the cleanup function as well. So whenever the component is demount or destroyed, we need to do a cleanup. So I'm going to return a cleanup function. So this was an arrow function, and inside the cleanup function, I'm going to write window dot remove this event listener, and the name of the event is resize. All right, so we have made our custom hook, and let's try this custom hook. So I'm going to go to the component screen, and inside the component screen, I'm going to add the constant screen size, and this will be equals to the use screen. All right, and we don't want to take any initial value, and let's copy this and add this screen size. So I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to add the screen size here. All right, so now if we save it, then we can see that we are right now in the small screen. And if I increase the width, so let me increase this width, then it will change to the medium screen. So now we are in the medium screen. If I increase it more, then we are in the large screen. So this custom hook is actually giving us on which screen size you are. You are in a medium, small, or a large screen. So this is how you can actually write your custom hooks. So whenever you want to extract your logic from your component and you want to put it in the side, then you can create a custom hook for that. And even though if we see that this looks a little bit complex, but when we use it in our component, it's very simple. It is just defined by one single line where you call the custom hook and you get the value whatever you want and you use the value. So that's how beautiful the custom hook is. So I really like the feature of the custom hook. Whenever I want to extract my logic from the component, I create a custom hook, and inside the custom hook we can actually make use of the inbuilt hooks. So that's all I have in this video. So I hope you understood how to create the custom hooks now, and the complexity of the hooks based on your requirement. As your requirement is complex, you're going to create more complex custom hook. If the requirement is simple, you're going to create a simple React hook. I hope you liked the video. A thumbs up is appreciated. You can also connect with me via Facebook or Instagram. You can follow me on Twitter. I will add the links in the description below. And before you go, don't forget to subscribe the channel and press the bell icon so that you don't miss the videos like this one. Thank you. Thanks for watching.